Well, the EPA has published a final WOTUS rule, which will replace the Navigable Water Protection Rule. It's a frustrating move for ag groups who say it creates confusion and represents government overreach on private property. Joining us now, Roger McEowen with the Washburn School of Law. Roger, as always, thanks for being here. You know, the scope of government's authority over wet areas on private land has been controversial for more than 40 years. So if you could just give us a brief background on that matter as we look forward to how this rule is going to really play out.
Yeah, you're right, Suzanne. Good to be with you today. This has been controversial almost from the start of the Clean Water Act amendments in 1972. The legislative history of this discharge requirement before you put a pollutant, and that's a specially defined term, into the navigable waters of the United States. The legislative history reveals that Congress was not thinking about preserving wetlands when the definition of a pollutant was written. Instead, what they did was they blended together under the umbrella of pollutants the Corps' responsibility to protect navigation with the EPA's responsibility to prevent contamination. And that's where you got the genesis of upstream regulation that environmental groups and numerous courts latched onto. And from the very beginning, routine farming activities were exempted from the discharge permit requirement. But we've had so many court opinions in the last 45 years. And on two occasions, the U.S. Supreme Court has tried to clarify the process of what is a wetland, or the definition of what is a wetland, what is a WOTUS, and they've just really actually created probably more confusion. And then you've got the rewrite under the Obama administration, then the rewrite of the rewrite in the Trump administration, and now the rewrite of the rewrite of the rewrite again. And here we go with what I would view as, again, an overreach beyond Congress's original intent.
You know, Roger, I think everybody at home right now, that these rewrites, their head is spinning, and rightfully so. You know, you and I were on the air here on RFD-TV last Friday when the final rule was announced. I don't know if you could just give us some of the highlights of really what they're saying.
Yeah, and I remember that last Friday. It just came out, and you asked me to talk about it. I hadn't had a chance to read it, but I have had a chance to go through the 500-plus pages. And let me give you three major points that I think farmers need to be aware of with respect to this. The EPA wants to restore the significant nexus test via adjacency, or significant nexus via adjacency. And that's a big change in the definition of adjacency. And then on prior converted cropland, the agencies are supposedly clarifying that prior converted cropland, which is not water, is not a water, but somehow could be a water if the agencies had not clarified that it's not a water. Try and figure that one out. And the burden is placed on the landowner to prove that their prior converted cropland is actually prior converted cropland and therefore not a water. And when you read the rules, you basically have to move heaven and earth to establish that proof. And I think the third point is the final rule is vague enough to give the government regulatory authority over non-navigable ponds and ditches and potholes. But I think the real key in all of this is that adjacency redefinition. And that's what that's what I think farmers should focus on, because that's going to pick up your farm field drain tile.
You know, there are so many impacts, right, in everything that you're saying. Of course, a lot of folks now waiting to see how that Sackett case is going to play out as well. How will that impact this ruling?
Well, it could totally vitiate the ruling, completely wipe it out. This is boggling to me why the agencies would try to, what I would consider to be, jump the process, because the Supreme Court will have the final say on this. And so who knows what they're going to do, but it would certainly have been appropriate, at least in my thinking, just to continue where we were at with this, not come up with a new attempt at a redefinition before the Supreme Court tells us the boundaries of what a navigable water is in terms of its definition. But that Sackett case is going to be monumental.
Yeah,
or at least has the potential to be monumental.
Absolutely. Waiting for the Supreme Court to voice their thoughts on this, and that'll have the deciding factor. We're going to have to wait and see how it plays out. Roger, as always, just a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much. Roger McEowen with the Washburn School of Law. Always appreciate your information and all of your insight.